Welcome to Write More Late. My name is Sarah with the Midwest Writing Center, and we are on episode 1 of the fall of 2023. So pretty exciting. It's like a new season, except that I haven't used those terms before. For folks who have never been with us for a Write More Late in the past, here's how it goes. I'm gonna dual talk. This series exists to give free resources to anyone in the literary world who might want them. We want to cover as much as we can in the literary world, make it as accessible as possible. And that's the purpose. We want to help you write more light into your life. What we're going to be talking about today is the novel in story form, or a story in vignettes. Those are two different but very similar things. I considered splitting them up into 2 pieces, but that would be really short and really repetitive. After I give that talk, we will have updates on the Midwest Writing Center, upcoming events, upcoming or ongoing projects, stuff like that. And then we'll have a 5-minute free write. So as this is a product of the Midwest Writing Center, it is associated with all of our other wonderful things that we do. I know that I often come off as pretty effusive, and I am, but I was a member of the Writing Center for a very long time before I was employed here, and that is why I'm so passionate about it. I, sought out this position because of how much I love this org. So, well, I know I probably seem like I sell really hard. It's because I really believe this stuff. We are the Quad City's first and only literary arts nonprofit, and we want all of our work to help foster appreciation for the written word, support and educate its creators. And we want to help you write more light into your life. Some days on this web series, it'll be a short lesson in something literary, and some days I will interview someone in the arts. That has a lot of different meanings, can be a lot of different things. We talk about a lot of different things. And I think that's what's exciting, because I believe that story is apparent in all art, narrative is everywhere, and we should be always looking for those opportunities to engage with the world through whatever medium makes sense to us. Okay, today we are talking about the novel in story form, or story in vignettes. And at some point I will condense that into just saying one or the other. But first we will talk about the differences. So when I say story in this context for today, what I mean is a short story. So something probably under like 30 pages, maybe not obviously. It can be really up to like 100. That's when it gets into novella territory, is around like 80 pages. So I mean pretty short. I mean probably under 30 pages when I say story for today's purposes. A lot of the time I say the word story and I mean narrative. That's a different topic for a different day. What is narrative? I should maybe write that down as a topic. So a novel in story form would be a full-length novel. Don't have examples here, but I'm going to save them for when they're really relevant. Is a full-length novel, so over 130 pages-ish, that tells one narrative using multiple short stories to do so. And if we think about that like a TV series or a book series or a movie series, it makes more sense. We think we have one episode that tells one story, but there's an overarching plot that tells a much bigger story. So that's a novel in story form. Something like S.E. Hinton's Some of Tim's Stories is a great example. It's a series of super short stories, like 3 pages, that tell the narrative of Tim's life. There's also Ghost worlds. Comics really cover this topic or cover this territory a lot. Ghost World is by Daniel Clowes. It's a comic, it's a graphic novel. Every few pages is a new story about one or two characters. Usually Enid is the protagonist. There's the Vagina Monologues is one larger narrative. Granted, that's usually on stage, but for our purposes, written story is written story. I have lots of cats. They will probably make appearances. So Vagina Monologues is many women's stories told together to send one single message. So it's not maybe all part of a single narrative, but it does create a single narrative as you combine these stories. Also, here's one that I have on hand. I tried to gather my books up and I could only find two, which is pretty weird. Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried. This is really short biographies based on the contents of people's bags. It takes place during the Vietnam War and is the story of the soldiers and literally the things that they are carrying with them in Vietnam. They don't have a lot of belongings and they don't have a lot of ability to carry things. And here's how you know a person through the things that they are carrying with them as they are abroad, as they are fighting. It's kind of, yeah, I already said it's biographies. We might say in like journalism, it would be like a personality profile. Yeah, really, really excellent book. Highly recommend. Some of the most beautiful writing you've ever seen. And it tells one narrative through many stories. This is Fool. He is a good boy, but he could stand to get out of my way. I wasn't sure if this next book really counted because it's sort of just so very much a product of modernism more than it is short stories. And I'll talk about modernism probably a lot, but I'll probably also dedicate an episode to it at some point. I really like modernism, but what modernism does is sort of cut out the filler and tends to mess with the structure of time in narrative. And as such, you're not getting that connective tissue of the story that would take you from day 1 to day 2. You're often skipping from day 1 to day 15 because what happened in those 13 days was not relevant to the greater story. So this book is probably, this could be said for most modernist novels, but certainly not all of them. That's really like a huge statement that I'm not prepared to make, but I've gotten with me The Sun Also Rises by Hemingway. I am a big Hemingway fan. He may come up again, he may not. So I think that that's really sort of a weird outlier, but I don't like to discount things just because they don't follow every guideline that I've set, right? And so the difference here is these are not necessarily complete stories that are making up the larger narrative, which brings us to vignettes. And that's sort of, I mean, that happens in novels all the time. It happens in memoirs all the time. Vignettes are like scenes, they're snapshots. And we have often seen stories in vignettes, which then takes us to that shorter story, that shorter narrative in pages, shorter in pages, that instead of having one straight line of time in which the narrative is told, it's told just in scenes, and they too lack that connective tissue between pieces. Other books that I've written down to talk about, The Hip Hop Family Tree, that's a comic and it's nonfiction. It's really wonderful. There are like 6 of it now. And that is just the story of how hip hop was created and became the genre that it is today. But because it is a true story, nonfiction, lots of players going on, it tells multiple stories that are disjointed, right? They're not necessarily happening together, they're not necessarily happening at the same time, but they're all independent, individual, full stories that bring us to the greater narrative. Then I've got Robinson by Aram Pachyan. Now that's not originally written in English, so that so it's a little harder to come by. There's an English translation, but it's not widely available. And each of those stories, it's a short story collection, but each of those stories is coming together to tell the story of Robinson Crusoe in a different time and place. So that's sort of a weird example, but I think a noteworthy one. And then a lot of poetry books follow this these parameters, where they're telling multiple stories or sharing, showing, illustrating multiple scenes that eventually lend to a greater narrative. So I've got Renunciations by, last name is Kelly. I was recently debating with someone whether or not her name is Donika or Donika. So Donika or Donika Kelly wrote the Renunciations. It's a really gorgeous poetry collection that is telling a larger story through smaller individual poems. In the Language of My Captor by Shane McCrae, really gorgeous story about telling an identity story through the language of the captor or the ruler when you are captive. Instead of Dying by Lauren Haldeman is a story of grief, of bereavement, and it tells many shorter pieces along the way about bereavement. Ready for the World by Becca Klaver, that was a scary moment, is a narrative, it's a collection, lots of poems in there, probably 70 poems in there, that tells the story of a girlhood. Remaking Achilles is about the Angola prison protests. That's by a woman who has a name, Carolyn Tix, T-Y-X, Teeks maybe. What's Left by Tate Lewis-Carroll. I've had them on the show last summer. That is the story, that's another bereavement story about collecting an understanding of one's identity after they've passed. And then this is an interesting one. I gained a lot of insight about this book just this weekend, though I read it many months ago. Behavior of Words by Duyan. That's, again, not originally written in English. The translation is by Aron. Really gorgeous book. And I felt that when I read it, it had, these poems were really talking to each other and telling a story together, across the pages. And it turns out that that was intentional, but it was not originally written in that format. So that was really interesting for me to learn. And I thought I'd bring it up because it sort of subverts some of the ideas that I presented. And I think that's, useful. Cat stuff. Okay, so now that we have some examples, I'm not looking to see if anyone is hanging out with me right now. I'd love for you to drop in the comments or just think about stories that you can think of that follow these parameters, where there are shorter stories that tell a larger narrative when put together. Now, when might that be useful? I find myself really attracted to this form. And part of the reason for that is that as a writer, I get bored creating connective tissue. So I always figure I'll come back to this. And, I just thought of another one that I totally should have grabbed, White Magic by Elissa Washuta. That is a very large nonfiction book. And it positions itself as a book of essays. But really, it's a collection of nonfiction stories that tell a greater story. I would also say that a lot of her work in essays, each essay has an individual essay will follow this pattern as well. It'd be a vignette or a prose poem that lends to a greater narrative within the essay. She is a really talented with this particular form. I'd say maybe, I don't want to say probably, Night Rooms by Gina Nutt, which is also sells itself as a book of essays. But the narratives are interweaving throughout the collection. It's sort of a complicated version, but I would say it certainly exists as vignettes that are telling a larger story. So I find myself attracted to this form because I have trouble writing that connective tissue. And I figure I can either come back to it later or see if it works, right? Sometimes I come back to it, fill it in as I see fit. Sometimes I don't, and sometimes it's fine on its own. I really love that. I think that leaves, as a reader, I love reading things like that. It gives the reader some autonomy and some power, while also giving the writer the space to let their story breathe and maybe not over-explain or take away the magic of the interpretation. Reasons that you might do it that are not just that you feel like it would include, not every detail needs to be said. Maybe you're not at liberty to tell every detail. Maybe you don't have the space or peace or time or whatever it is to tell every detail. That's important and relevant, and I think ignored a lot when we talk about these things. It is important to know what you are capable of as a storyteller. Not to say it's important to know what skills you have, what tools you have, but it's important to know what you as a human being are capable of putting on the page, because we don't want to be writing work that hurts us as we write. We don't want to be triggering ourselves or triggering our readers. So it's important to know how much of that we can put on the page without hurting ourselves. And that's, of course, kind of an extreme example, but it is real and it does happen. Thought of another example of this form, Camone Felix's Dyscalculia. Camone is spelled Camonghe, I believe. Felix, Felix. Now the book Dyscalculia is sold as a memoir. It's marketed as a memoir, but it is very it's not disjointed. Like, the narrative works. I say disjointed, and what I mean is, like, literally there are no joints connecting. I don't mean that it's disorienting. I don't mean that it doesn't work. So she tells the story, this memoir of love and mental health in vignettes. It's a scene, a day, a poem at a time, putting together this narrative that tells one story through many. Excellent book. I recommend it to everyone. And the reason that talking about triggers reminded me of it is I was able to interview her. And I specifically asked, this book deals with really difficult things, but at no time did I feel like I needed to take space away from the book. And she said that the way she was able to do that was by taking care of herself as she wrote it. If she was going to get triggered, if she was going to get harmed in her writing, then she would be setting other people up for that as well. And no one would be better off for it. And I think that's an important note. There's a difference between catharsis and learning about experiences and empathy and overt harm. So if you are maybe engaging in a writing practice in which you are making yourself vulnerable in a way that can be dangerous, don't do that. You don't have to do that. There's no reason you have to do that. Now on to other reasons. Sometimes it's what the story wants. And I know non-writers will hear that and think that I am full of baloney. I have had people tell me that before, that doesn't make sense, the story doesn't write itself, etc. But as a writer, and who has spoken to other writers, sometimes the story does whatever the story wants to do. Sometimes the cat does whatever the cat wants to do. And sometimes, yeah, that's all the reason I need. The story wanted to do it this way. And I feel like I'm more the vessel through which the story is told sometimes than the creator of the story. And that's okay. Sometimes the story wants to be told that way. Other reasons are sometimes too much information is too much information. Sometimes those spaces, as with Hemingway in The Sun Also Rises, sometimes those spaces just don't matter. Sometimes, and I thought about talking about nonlinear storytelling as part of this, but I think that's a totally different topic that could go way out of control, way off topic. But sometimes it's a nonlinear story, and that and that, as just a matter of course, as a facet of the genre, doesn't lend itself to being told with that connective tissue, and that's relevant. If the story wants to be told or is best told in a nonlinear way, you're probably not going to have that much connective tissue, and or you have a resolution in the end that provides the connective tissue, but it doesn't happen that way in the narrative. He's not hurting me, just to be clear. I wouldn't let him do this if he was hurting me. He's like gumming me. He's got teeth in the front, but he's got, hey, that time he hurt me. I didn't want anybody to be watching this and like, your cat's misbehaving and you're a problem. Yeah. And I know I'm saying like the story wants a lot here. And again, if you're not used to like this sort of language, it doesn't make sense. But I think, and I'm operating under the assumption that we are working in the service of creating the best work. We don't have to. We don't have to be working in the service of creating the best work. We can be just creating what comes. And that's as valid. That is, they're both equally important and valid ways of creating art. But I'm operating currently under the assumption that we're doing our work in service of creating the best piece of art that we can, which in this video is a story. And you might need some distance to determine that, right? Like you're working on this piece and you're working on this piece and you're working on this piece, and for whatever reason it's not working. Maybe it's because you're trying to connect dots that don't need to be connected. If I were to determine when this is the best route versus not the best route, I have a personal example. I wrote an essay recently that was pretty straightforward, first-person narrative. Here are events, here are some facts. You know, you weave a little bit of some statistics in, but mostly this is a personal story that I'm telling about myself. And it didn't work. It was a little flat. It didn't have, I don't think I gave my audience a reason to care about me. And I think that it really was asking for I don't think I gave the audience much reason to care about this particular story, whether or not they cared about me, because it was very, this is one story told in a linear way, and here is my resolution. And it was just kind of, that's it. You know, you're like, okay, well, I read that story and there wasn't a lot to sink your teeth into. Meanwhile, I was working on another piece that I was just doing vignettes. That was intentional. I was only telling very specific scenes, which all had the exact same theme. So they were told maybe in different forms. Like I used some dialogue, like it's a script. I used some first person, I used some second person, I used some third person, but they were all the same story told different point of view, different circumstance, but the same setup for the story, the same premise for the story. And that was a separate project. I didn't really have big intentions for it. It still hasn't, I mean, it's still sitting here unread by most people. But I felt like I reached sort of a spark when I combined the two. So I would start with a vignette, or not, I don't remember. It's been several months. But perhaps I give the first paragraph, the first two paragraphs of the essay, cut, vignette, then more from that straightforward essay, cut, vignette. And this is something I did. I decided to combine these two pieces because I was struggling with both of them. And I wanted each of them to be a little meatier. I wanted each of them to have something grounding. One was pretty much only ground, and the other was pretty much only emotion. And combining them, it's not finished. I can promise it's not finished. But combining them did give each of them a little gravitas. And I was able to turn it from, 12 disparate stories into one in a way that surprised me. And I did that sort of as an experiment. I was fed up. A lot of things that I do in this vein, I do as experiments. I'm stuck. I feel I have nothing to lose, especially, we have the internet. We can save 100 different versions of a document on our computers or wherever we save things. So I really didn't have anything to lose by combining them. And it is a genre, clearly, or a form that I'm really into, that I read a lot. Why not try to engage with it in a more immediate way? I would love to share that with you all, but I will not. For so many reasons. Mostly it's not done. And then close second is, this is not a space for me to share my work. This is a space for me to give information and advice and thoughts and wisdom as much as I can muster. Yeah. So when thinking, especially if you're like, hey, I came here for inspiration and now I want to make a project, then the thing to do, my advice about going forward with this, as I'm now experimenting with this in real time, more than just the one time, is my advice is to just try a topic. Doesn't really matter. Throw a dart at a map. And do both of those things that I just said. Take the same story and tell it over and over again. Short, don't do too much labor. This is an experiment. This is for fun. This is for learning. Tell it over and over again, different point of view. I will give an example. A walk in a park. Okay, a walk in a park. So one of these stories is a child. One of these stories is a lost child. One of these stories is a nighttime jogger. One of these stories is a grieving widow. One of these stories is a bird watcher. Right. And then you can tell them from all these different points of view. You can tell one first person, one second person, one third person, one script, one in music, whatever it is that feels right. And then you can intertwine that, interweave that, splice that with, something about parks or something about walking. Both of those, I'm like now kind of upset I'm giving this out to the world as if, all of us are going to create the exact same thing, because I think this is such an exciting idea, especially talking about walking in the arts. That's one of our upcoming episodes. I don't know if it's on the schedule for September, October, but it has to be soon because it's going to get cold. Is walking. It's something, especially just like active kinesthetic activity, interaction with your body is something that we talk about a lot in the arts, particularly in writing, is what can be gained from walking. What can be gained for your writing from walking. So you can, I mean, that could be it. You could do some sort of like study on walking or on parks or on the public park as a concept. And some of these stories are sad. Some of these stories are scary. Some of these stories are peaceful. Some of these stories are happy. Some are meditative, whatever it is. I don't know. It's not written yet. So that's one idea that I have about how to start this experiment. And of course, that's certainly a lot more like lyric essay, because that's my bend right now. But it's also possible. We see this a lot in ensemble movies, ensemble stories, where it's like a funeral or a wedding, and we're seeing everyone's point of view on the deceased or the family, right? They're all the family of the deceased, or the bridal party. So that's also an option. I think that if we're experimenting, going full on novel length is quite the commitment, which is why I would recommend doing it to start in super short stories or vignettes. Just, I don't want you to be writing, I don't want anyone to be committing themselves to writing 20 short stories to fill a single narrative without, being prepared for that. But do it. I will read it. I will read it right now. That is something I really love to engage with. Of course, if you are, well read, well prepared for, well immersed in short stories in general, you can also play around with short story ideas you have and how they may connect, repeating characters in your short stories, or seeing what you've already written and see how, did I already say that, how they connect? If you just love writing short stories, I love writing short stories. I haven't in a very long time, but I really love short stories. And do it, play with stories from the same town, play with stories from the same characters, play with stories on the same theme, and see what narrative you can build around it. Or alternatively, if you're a planner, think of a narrative and see how to fill in the important blanks, but not all of the blanks. I'll leave it at that. I hope that was helpful. I hope that was inspirational. I definitely have given myself like 6 ideas that I'm going to move forward with, and I'm very excited about. It's what I live for. It's why I really love doing this web series, is because I always end up having to really immerse myself in these topics that I do care about, and in literature that teaches me something. I feel like you don't even have to necessarily like what you're engaging with to learn from it. And sometimes, especially if you don't, you can learn a lot from it. Yeah, I hope that you got what I got out of this. I'm going to move on now to updates at the Midwest Writing Center. I'm a planner. Tomorrow, Wednesday, September 27th, my apologies, 2023. We will have another of our Wednesday night free writes that is for middle school and high schoolers who want to share space with other writers, with their peers, and either work on writing or start new writing projects, do some critiques, whatever feels right in that space. We've got a printer, we've got internet, we've got plenty of pens and paper. So come share space with other writers and talk writing. I'll be there. The way it's been going so far, I will bring some prompts or some projects, but we can look at works in progress and do some workshopping, some critiquing. We've been doing that. Create new work and talk about our trials, triumphs, and tribulations in the writing world. Then on Thursday on Write More Light, Tamara Boyajian will be here to talk about literature in endangered languages. So we talk sometimes in the world, we use the term dead language when we refer to languages that are no longer spoken. But that's happening all the time in our world, is languages are growing endangered. When people no longer have a homeland, they are likely to no longer be using the language of their homeland. They're going to be speaking the language of wherever they are. And so those stories, those languages, those stories, and those traditions are lost. So Tamar is a expert on that topic, and will be doing a lot of teaching for us this weekend, or Thursday, not this weekend. This weekend, October 1st, we've got Lowland Block Party, which is at the labor space between Rostocks and Ragged Records in Rock Island on 3rd and 21st, 3rd and 20th in Rock Island, 3rd Avenue. It's going to be not all day, all afternoon, 12 to 5 p.m. There's going to be live music all day. There's going to be vendors. There's going to be food. There's going to be local brewery, but the vendors are going to have like clothing and art, pottery, and all manner of artisan works. And we'll be there. Midwest Writing Center will be there. We'll have some writers give readings throughout the day between music sets. And we'll be selling books and talking about programming. It's going to be, I'm really excited. This is one of my favorite events. Then coming up after that, we have our first Spectra event of the fall is with Alec Hirschman. I have his book. Okay, yes. Our Foster Stall chapbook series selection for 2021. For a Second in the Dark by Alec Hirschman. So he will be the headliner of our Spectra reading on October 6th, which is, I believe, from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. Yes, on Friday, October 6th. He'll be reading with Aubrey Ryan, a former selection from the Foster Stall chapbook series, Emily Kingery, and someone else. Sophia Best, who won the Iowa Chapbook Award. Very big deal, very gorgeous work, and is also, Fee happens to be a former intern at the Young Emerging Writers Program. I've been telling you things in backwards order. So on Thursday, October 5th, is our annual banned books reading with the Rock Island Public Library. We've got a ton, I think like 15 readers from the community who are going to be bringing their favorite banned books. These are teachers, got a couple of children, librarians, lovers of literature are coming together. We're going to talk about the books we've chosen and why they were banned. And we're going to read just a tiny bit from each of these books. That's at the Watts Midtown branch of the Rock Island Public Library. Doors are at 5:30. We'll have a little food, a little reception at 5:30, and then the reading starts at 6. There's a lot going on, so bear with me. Of course, Wednesdays through the end of October, we're having our Wednesday night free night. So I already talked about that a little bit. On Saturday, October 14th, we'll be at the Iowa City Book Festival. So that'll be really fun. If you're in the Iowa City area, come hang out with us at the book fair. October 19th, I couldn't find it. I'm looking at my calendar and I was having email sounds. We'll have our next Spectra reading event. Oh, I don't have the book with me. I'd have to hop down with Erica Lewis. She is on her Mahogany tour. It's a really excellent book I picked up this weekend. I am not done with it yet, but wow, was it good. Erica Lewis is phenomenal. You can look her up. You can see a lot of her work online. And she will be reading with Melissa Conway, Tutu, and someone else really excellent. I guess I can only think of 2 people at a time. I'm going to feel bad about that when I remember who I've forgotten. It's going to be a really excellent reading. Again, that is a Spectra reading series event. So that's at Rostocks. And that one starts at 7 and will end after 9. That one also has an open mic element. You know what? I'm starting to get my Spectra events confused, but definitely Erica Lewis on Thursday, the 19th, 7 p.m. at Rostocks. I think going to stop there. We're getting into November after that. Really, really exciting, really excited about everything that's coming up in the near future at the Writing Center. And I've already given you an assignment and I didn't actually prepare a free write. So I'm just going to ask you to go, please write more light into your life and work on that story and vignettes.